Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Everett, and along with my wife, Michelle Everett, welcome to day number 19 in our study of Christ, the living expression, as recorded in the Gospel of St. Luke. I trust that you have followed us each day and that you've been enjoying and learning just as we have, because this really is a powerful, powerful story. Because what it deals with is from the point of infancy all the way through his ministry to Israel, we're looking at Christ. Now, as we go into today's story, he's on his way to Jerusalem. This is going to be the culmination, the finality of his earthly ministry at that point. And so he's on point with the things that he's teaching them in order to prepare them. You know, I find that when someone is transitioning, most of their discussion is about what's really important. So as he travels through Jericho here, there's another important lesson that he conveys. So let's go into now chapter 19. In the city of Jericho, there lived a very wealthy man named Zacchaeus, who was the supervisor of all the tax collectors. That simply means that he actually sold contracts in tax collectings to other tax collectors, and he would collect a percentage from what they made. As Jesus made his way through the city, Zacchaeus was eager to see Jesus. He kept trying to get a look at him, but the crowd around Jesus was massive. Zacchaeus was a very short man and couldn't see over the heads of the people, so he ran on ahead of everyone and climbed up a blossoming fig tree. So that tells you it's around Passover time, because the fig tree's got blossoms on it, and that's when it occurred. So he could get a glimpse of Jesus as he passed by. When Jesus got to that place, he looked up into the tree and said, now isn't this amazing? Zacchaeus, hurry on down, for I am appointed to stay at your house today. So he scurried down the tree and came face to face with Jesus. As Jesus left to go with Zacchaeus, many in the crowd complained. Look at this. I mean, again, it's not just a complaint. This is a sneering kind of complaint. Of all the people to have dinner with, he's going to eat in the house of a crook. So that tells you what Zacchaeus' reputation was among the people in Jericho. Zacchaeus joyously welcomed Jesus and was amazed over his gracious visit to his home. Zacchaeus stood in front of the Lord and said, half of all that I own I will give to the poor. And Lord, if I have cheated anyone, I promise to pay back 4 times as much as I stole. Jesus said to him, this shows that today life, you see, Christ, the living expression, has come to you and your household, not just you alone, your household. For you are a true son of Abraham. The Son of Man has come to seek out and to give life to those who are lost. You see, Zacchaeus was willing to say, Lord, I'm ready to change. And no matter how much money I have accumulated and acquired through the years, if I've defrauded anyone, I will pay them back 4 times what I took from them. Now, that's telling you at that point that money does not control his heart. Covetousness does not control his heart like it does many of the religious leaders. So from there, Jesus began to share a parable as they were entering into Jerusalem. The crowds were following him, and they were convinced that God's kingdom realm was going to be revealed at this time, especially once he got into Jerusalem. But he knew it was necessary to change their perspective, because what their expectation was not God's expectation. And all that can lead to is disappointment and disillusionment. So he tells the story. Once there was a wealthy prince who left his province to travel to a distant land, him, where he would be crowned king and then return. Before he departed, he summoned his 10 servants together and said, I am entrusting each of you with $50,000 to trade with while I am away. Invest it and put the money to work until I return. In other words, the gifts that you have been given, there's an expectation that you're going to be productive and fruitful. You're not just going to sit around, lazy away, and just talk about the gift. No, there's a work that goes with it. It's like the scripture says, he comes, said his reward is with him, and his work is before him. You see, you reward servants because there's a work that the servants had done. And so the expectation was that they would trade, they would invest, and they would bring forth an increase. That is God's expectation of us today as well, is that we would occupy. See, that word occupy till he comes means trade till he comes. That is, invest. Invest your gifts. Invest your talents. Invest your resources until he comes, because there is, if you will, a reward that goes with faithfulness for doing that. So when he returned to the land, and he came to his servants to see what profits they had produced, the first one came forward and said, Master, I took what you gave me and invested it, and it multiplied 10 times. Splendid, you have done well, my excellent servant, because you have shown that you can be trusted in this small matter. See, if you're faithful in that which is least, that qualifies you for much more. He said, I now grant you authority to rule over 10 fortress cities. The second came and said, Master, what you left me with has multiplied 5 times. You see, although maybe his ability was not the same as the first presenter, but yet he had produced, and we see fruit from his investment. His master said, I also grant you authority in my kingdom over 5 fortress cities. And then here comes a third one. Now, what these aren't necessarily just individuals, but he's talking here about what you can do with a gift and how that everyone doesn't necessarily have the same grace or gifting from God, but everyone can produce with what they have. So another came before the king and said, Master, here's the money you entrusted to me. I hid it for safekeeping. You see, I live in fear of you, for everyone knows you are a strict master and impossible to please. You push us for a high return on all that you own, and you always want to gain from someone else's effort. Now, that doesn't sound like a very faithful servant. In fact, that's not a very faithful servant. The king said, You wicked servant, I will judge you using your own words. If what you said about me is true, that I am a harsh man pushing you for a high return and want to gain from others' efforts, why didn't you at least put my money in the bank? That is, put it on the table, do some trading to earn some interest on what I entrusted to you. The king said to his other servants, Take the money he has and give it to the faithful servant who multiplied my money 10 times over. But master, the other servants objected, Why give it to him? He already has so much. Yes, replied the king, but to all who have been faithful, even more will be given them. And for the ones who have nothing, that is, you've been unfaithful, even the little they seem to have will be taken from them. Now bring all those rebellious enemies of mine who rejected me as their king. Bring them here before me and execute them. Now I want you to understand This does not happen until that full generation has passed and the Roman army comes. And Jesus, because he later talks about this, once he comes down, if you will, the Mount of Olives, and he's headed toward Jerusalem, and we see a fulfillment of Psalm 118, when they cry out, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Well, they lay out their prayer shawls, and as the donkey that's carrying Jesus is moving forward, something important to remember about this donkey is it's not necessarily this donkey's day in the sun. The donkey is simply transportation, a servant for the most important one on the face of the earth at that time. Can we see ourselves as transportation, servants, transporting the most important one in the universe? And that's Christ, the living expression. I mean, out of all the donkeys that were around at this time, this one was chosen for that unique moment in history. And you think about it, we as well, we're chosen for this unique moment in history to be the transportation of Christ, the living expression. Our mouths becomes his mouth. Our hands, his hands. Our feet, his feet. Wherever we carry him, that's where he goes. Whatever we say about him, that's what he gets to say in the earth. And whatever we do with our hands as ministering to broken humanity, that's him, Christ, the living expression, doing that. And so here it is. When he gets to the bottom, the crowds are ecstatic. There's a loud outburst of joy that's going on because of all the signs and the wonders and the miracles that they've witnessed. And then here are those religious spirits again. They're saying, listen, teacher, you must order your followers to stop at once saying these things. And Jesus said, if they don't, then the rocks will cry out, because the rocks that were created by the Word, and he is the Word, said even they will respond to their Creator and cry out in shouts of praise. And so as Jesus approaches Jerusalem, he weeps over Jerusalem. And he tells them this message. Since you would not recognize God's day of visitation, your day of devastation is coming. What a sobering message, because they could have received life, but they rejected life because they rejected the package, the vessel that life had come to them in. And it didn't necessarily measure up to their expectations, but it was God's presentation. And he said, if you reject visitation, then be aware of something. Devastation is coming. And then he enters the temple and he cleanses the temple from all the merchants and their merchandising in the temple. And he announces to them, don't you realize that my Father's house is to be a house of prayer? And what you have turned it into is a den of thieves, because you are abusing my Father's house. And from there, Jesus, he taught in the temple area. The high priests, the experts of law, and the prominent men of the city kept trying to find a way to accuse Jesus, for they wanted him dead. He was bringing an end to that system, and they knew it. They could find no reason to accuse him, for he was a hero to the people, and the crowds were awestruck by every word that he spoke. So we're getting closer now to the culmination of our story about Christ, the living expression. So make sure you read chapter 20 for tomorrow, and we'll be back to share more of the story.